Right, so we've got some questions on covert conditions and overt conditions and some examples. Um, so in my business, I have clients, and a good example of the overt condition is if you don't pay me within 7 days, I'm going to sue you. This isn't this is an overt condition. And then silently, 7 days later, I sue them by applying to the courts. I don't need to tell them that. They've been warned in advance. This all happens silently. They're just going to get a letter few days later from the county court to say that they're being sued. So best example I can think of covert and overt. And the same with my students. I request that my students send me, if there's homework, assignments that I'm supposed to mark, they must send me the assignment by email by 9 o'clock on a particular day. So setting the overt, I'm not going to negotiate this with them. This is the condition. So I say to them, well, I'm not going to mark it unless it's in by 9 o'clock. If they send it at 9:05, I'll silently not mark it. And then when I give the assignments back, their assignment isn't there. So I haven't written back to, oh, it's too late, I'm not going to mark it. No, it just that will eventually teach them that if they want it marked, it has to be in by 9 o'clock. I don't need to make any excessive effort. They'll get they'll get the message sooner or later. There was another point about so when is it control, when is it manipulation, and also when is it okay to even set boundaries in the first place. I'm extremely sparing with boundary setting. I only really set boundaries if something gets in the way of a practical outcome. That's the first situation. So some practical outcome has to be achieved, and it's not going to be achieved if someone continues to behave the way they're behaving, or their behaviour falls so far outside the moral norm that I'm not going to put up with it. We have to put up, people are going to be human beings, they're going to have a full range of human emotions, those emotions are going to leak into their behaviour. We have to learn how to tolerate being in the presence of people who are humans. But there's a limit there, and if that's crossed, then boom, boundary. But it's on the practical side that it really matters. And the example, I set a boundary earlier this year. So last year, after 13 years, we finally got married, and as it's permissible for men to marry, we got married. And in the run up to that, so once the engagement was announced, one of our friends said, "Are you going to buy rings? Are you going to buy rings?" And I did not want to do the whole ring thing. I'm not concerned with jewellery or external things anyway. My other half wasn't either. It's thousands of pounds by the time you both have to have it. I did not want anything to do with this. If we're going to spend thousands of pounds, let's spend thousands of pounds on something else. Let's do a nice holiday or something, a cat, but not rings. But this friend kept saying every time he was with, "So, what sort of ring are you going to get?" And my other half was starting to show a little bit of interest. After all of this poking and prodding from my friend, I thought if this goes much further, we're going to be down Hatton Garden before you can say jackknife, and we're both going to be lighter by £5,000 because of this prompting. So I took the friend aside and said, just very quietly, I'm going to request that in the run-up to the wedding, please do not spontaneously bring up the subject of rings or any other matters of financial expense. So just don't do that in front of both of us. If you want to talk about it with me on my own, that's fine, but don't bring it up in front of both of us. But I very rarely do that. It's only because there was a practical consequence there. If there hadn't been the financial consequence, I wouldn't have bothered. If it was just embarrassing or annoying, I wouldn't have bothered. Um, and so I treat boundaries especially when if I'm going to request that someone behave differently, as I treat it like I've got a number of vouchers. I've got to use them sparingly. Once you use up the vouchers, you're going to use up your goodwill, because you only get a certain amount of goodwill with people. People, even the best people, respond very badly to being told what to do or boundaries. You start setting too many, they now have an obstacle course. They're now trapped in a maze of your ever expanding and changing boundaries, and they don't know where they are. So be absolutely sparing with it. And now I try and be as nice and kind and pleasant as I can about setting boundaries, but as I say, they're never nice to hear. If you're ever at the receiving end of one, it sends a shiver up your spine. And this friend, who's perfectly reasonable, he said to another friend, Tim set a boundary with me yesterday. This is about the rings. He set a boundary with me, and the other friend said, what was it like? And he said, chilling. So now, with the best will in the world and lots of Al-Anon training, it ain't going to go down well. So you save it for when it really matters. So with my other half, I will always preface it by saying, I have a polite request. Is this a good time to talk about it? So I don't force it into the conversation, and I keep my mouth shut most of the time. So I don't set boundaries, because you can always argue. You can argue anything if you think about it hard enough. Mm-hmm. I could be setting 15 a day. But there's a wonderful line that someone said to me in Al-Anon, in AA actually, a long time ago. There's an old Irishman who said, almost nothing matters. Which was a surprise to me. I thought everything mattered, but apparently almost nothing matters. I don't know how old any of you are individually, and I'm always terrible at guessing. But I'm 47, and I can. If you ask me to give a written account of my 20s, I'd struggle to fill more than 3 or 4 pages of a notebook. You're going to forget almost everything anyway. So why are we getting so exercised about it? If you had to write down everything that happened in 2004, how many things can you remember from 2004? I can't even. I'm struggling to think of where I even was then. So all these things that I thought mattered then, how much did they matter if 14 years later I have no idea of what they even were? What was I feeling in September 2004? No idea, but it seemed important at the time, I'm sure. So almost nothing matters. Second point, and this was a surprise too, of the few things that do matter, almost all of them sort themselves out. If you leave it long enough, it tends to go away. And then for the rest, there's God. So, God, what would you have me do in this situation? Do I have a valid contribution to make? And the motto in the traditions is Tradition 9. So to be no more organised than is strictly necessary. And that applies to the whole boundary setting thing. Because every time you set a boundary, it's a form of organisation. It prevents fluidity, it prevents naturalness, because people have to tiptoe around the landmine that you've set. And so to have as few as possible and to be as absolutely flexible as possible. There is a very good writer on spirituality and relationships called Rabbi Harold Kushner. Kushner. I recommend him hugely. And his advice on relationships is actually, I'm going to see if I can find a quote in here. I'll never find the page number. I think it's something like, we wives have let's see if I can find it. Here we go. 118. We women carry with us a picture of the ideal man, the sort of chap we would like our husbands to be. And this is the root of the whole problem. It's like you're not in love with the person, you're in love with who they're going to be once they've been trained. And as soon as I have the ideal for how someone should be, and this is the terrible thing, they're going to know it. They're going to know as soon as they walk in the room and you look them up and down that they have not matched up, because people smell demands. If you have a demand of someone, they will smell it as soon as they walk in the room. There is no concealing it. There is no concealing the fact. You know, maybe you've had this with one or other parent, this disapproval. You know as soon as you've walked in that you're disapproved of in these 18 important ways. Which one is going to get discussed first is the only question here. So you know from your own experience when someone thinks you don't match up. So this is the problem: is how can you have intimacy with someone if you're not having a relationship with them? You're having a relationship with the ideal image, and it irks you that the physical form in front of you is not matching the ideal image. You can't be present if there are two versions of the other person in the room, the person that is and the person you want them to be. Which one are you being intimate with? You've got to have one person in front of you. But Harold Kushner, anyway, that was a digression, says that your job in a relationship is to forgive everything and to serve the other person. Ugh.
Thinking of my son, my teenage son, that's not going to work.
Now, you put the Al-Anon hat on and service has its boundaries. So, for instance, to do something for someone, this is from the detachment sheet, to do something for someone that they should be doing for themselves does not serve them. So the program idea of service, it's not, they haven't got you over a barrel. It doesn't mean if they want you to do something, you have to do it. You must do what is actually of service. And maybe the thing which is actually of service is to get them to rely on their own inner resources rather than getting you to clear up after them. If you don't, they'll never learn. And that's partly the thing that you were saying earlier about when someone is powerlessness, when someone has powerlessness, that they're not actually helpless, but they have to take the initiative for seeking the help. And there's this horrible gap when you stop fixing someone in the hope that they will seek help themselves, and for a while they just carry on waiting for the help from you, and it ain't coming, and they're getting worse, and they're getting angrier and angrier. But you just have to. You need a lot of nerve for this. You've got to keep your nerves. You've got to. It's like playing poker or Russia and America in the 1950s with the finger on the big red button. You've got to keep your nerve and hold that until it goes one way or the other. And it's terribly difficult when someone is destroying themselves with an addiction. When I had to let go of someone a few years ago, I think I've already mentioned the situation. By the way, the person is now sober and clean for many years and it's all fine. So, happy ending. But the advice to me, someone gave me the advice, go and listen to this particular tape by an American AA speaker called Don Pritz, P-R-I-T-S. He's from Aurora, Colorado. When you go to these AA download websites, they'll often say where the speaker is from. It'll just say Don P from Aurora, Colorado to distinguish him from the other ones. I went and listened to the tape, and he talked about the situation of his own son, who was an alcoholic, who they refused to have back in the home at some point. They set the boundary. They said, you can't come back because we can't inflict on ourselves the suffering any longer of seeing you destroy yourself. and they had to put him out into the cold in Denver in December. And if you know anything, Denver is high, Rocky Mountains, very, very cold in December. And the little statement was, if you let him go, he may die. If you carry on fixing him, he's definitely going to die. So there is hope only if you let go, absolutely. So service is sometimes get them a cup of tea. Service is sometimes change the locks. Because it's serving what is in people's ultimate best interests, not serving their latest emotional whim, which is something else. So there are two topics there. There's service, which is, I believe, enabling other people to become everything they could be, and not doing anything which is going to get in the way of that. So it's enabling them to become what they could be, but not standing in the way of their progress. There's a great American person in recovery called Anne Lamott, Lamott. Her books are sensational. And one of the things she says is, help is the sunny side of control. A lot of what looks like help is actually you implementing your plans for someone else's recovery. There was something else on service and forgiveness. Now we're going to cover forgiveness after lunch under the heading of how not to be upset, which is the answer to how not to be upset ultimately. But that's the focus of a relationship, is to do those two things. Harold Kushner, very good on the topic. And the other things I wrote down to talk about, with this setting boundaries and trying to set maybe one a month rather than 15 a day. One of the Catholic popes, when he was being invested in his role as pope, they said, what motto are you going to live by as pope? Do you have if you had a little motto on your desk, what would it be? And he said it in Latin, being the pope. So I won't do it in Latin, I'll do it in English. It was observe everything. So being an Al-Anon, being an S-Anon, living with addicts, living with difficult people, being surrounded by crazy people, the job is not to blind yourself to what is going on or to become dumb. If you're going to be able to respond smartly, you do need to be observant. You do need to see clearly what is going on, the detachment. So observe everything. The next bit is the killer. Disregard most things. And then change a little. Observe everything, disregard most things, change a little. And the two Al-Anon mottos, which are incredibly helpful with this, are let it break around you, because maybe it needs to break. Maybe other people need to break before they will actually seek what genuinely helps them to recovery rather than temporarily gives them relief. There's a lot of what looks like helping is actually giving people relief. If you give people relief, they will not seek recovery. When you stop giving relief, they're in terrible pain, but then they'll finally make the call that needs to be made to the person they really need to speak to. And this was a slogan which I found immensely offensive when someone first presented it to me. How important is it? Because of course I want to reply, it's very important. Everything is very important. What do you mean something might not be important? I'm upset about it. It's important. And to apply that before taking any action, how important is it really? And let's do a little big book. So 117118. It's how to deal with disagreement and how to live with people who have character defects. And this is one of my favourite passages. We do not mean that you have to agree with your husband whenever there is an honest difference of opinion. Just be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. And so if I'm going to have a discussion with someone about something, I make sure I'm completely placid first. If there's any anger or upset or tension, you can feel it in your throat, you can feel it in your voice. It will come out in your voice because your throat will be tense. And so you can't hide it. Don't even try. And if you're tense, I find if I'm tense, I'm blocked off from God, and I might come up with solutions and really clever things to say, but they're probably not going to help. If I wait till I'm calm and then say, God, what contribution would you have me make to this conversation? I say something which cuts through all the rubbish very quickly and solves it. And so to wait until I'm calm, if that takes months, fine. Unless something is on fire, in which case, put the fire out. So, occasionally one has to shout. If someone is in the road, you have to shout to pull them out of the road. But not to disagree in a resentful or a critical spirit. Next time you and he have a heated discussion, no matter what the subject, it should be the privilege of either to smile and say, this is getting serious, I'm sorry I got disturbed, let's talk about it later. And so you have to have your wits about you, because you might have to be the one, if you're having a better recovery day than them, and they haven't got this far in the big book, then you're the only one that has this information. So it might have to be you that is always the one that says this. Let's talk about it later. And if they want to argue, so I'm not going to, I can discuss, but I can't argue. And I'll do this with sponsees as well. I'll say, and this is a very helpful thing someone gave me in sponsorship. Everything I've got, someone in sponsorship gave it to me one way or another. I'm there as a sponsor to present ideas and to explain them, but not to convince you that what I say is right or to persuade you to do anything. And so if I'm having a discussion with my other half about something, where it's about it's either the cat or it's the central heating, like how people can live in the same building and want different temperatures and work that out, that's something that it should be so simple, but it's apparently not. I'm not there I get to present my view and explain it. But if I find myself repeating myself, I'm no longer giving them new information. I'm trying to force them to change their view by repeating myself. So, two other Al-Anon phrases are wait. Why am I talking? And then waste. Why am I still talking? So that's how to have discussions. That's how I've been taught to have discussions. Present and explain, don't convince or persuade. Give them the dignity of choosing whether or not to agree with you, and to allow them to differ. And then here's the absolute killer. Patience, tolerance, understanding, and love are the watchwords. Show him these things in yourself, and they will be reflected back to you from him. Live and let live is the rule. If you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, there will be little need to criticize each other. And the trick is you have to do this unilaterally for a while before they catch on to what is happening. So it might be months or years of practicing that before it happens, but the test case is my old mother, who hasn't gone to Al-Anon or hasn't gone to, despite the alcoholism in the family and the other things going on in the family. But I've consistently for a number of years applied this principle with her, which is that I do not react to any bad behaviour. So when she would on occasion get critical, or I don't know if you've ever heard the line, "You don't love me as much as," or "Why don't you love me as much as? If you loved me more, you would. Why don't you want to be with me? You'd rather be with your friends. You don't want to be here. I'm boring to you." All of those accusations. I refused for years to react, maintaining spiritual eye contact with the person behind the ego, and eventually all that behaviour dropped away. Because although conflict is powerful, love is much more powerful. And so if you maintain a loving position, people will ultimately be more attracted by that. They realise that there is always a choice. People know this instinctively. They won't be able to verbalise it. They know they're always choosing between the voice of the ego with the fear and the guilt and the attack and the grievance and the resentment, or they're choosing love and the voice of God. If you consistently present love and the voice of God to them, eventually they start to make the right choice, because it's just more attractive than conflict. Does that make sense? But one's got to be conflict free internally, and then to have that manifest externally for a while before it sinks in, before that line comes true. It's years, not months or weeks. So
I'm confused with that.
What do you mean?
How do you manage to you choose love against the confliction?
Yeah.
And show it towards the person if the confliction is there.
Within you or in them?
Within me.
That's this afternoon. How not to be upset. Good. Does anyone have any questions, or should we have lunch?
Can I just, it's not really a question, I just wanted to say something that you said earlier about that you put around you and they may not, it was the session before this, they may not ever come, or take a long time or something, I can't remember clearly. What came up for me is, I still feel, and it might be ego, I still feel that I need to voice it. I often find this when, he's doing something, like staying up till all hours watching something, I will still need to say, this really upsets me, this really bothers me. I know part of it is I don't want him to do it anymore, that's why I'm saying it. I think it's communication. I always maintain that I need to communicate it. I don't know if that's wholly honest.
I think there's an interesting question there, is when is it okay to let other people know that I'm upset about what they've done? If I can give an analogy from a different domain, if the enemy is bombing your country randomly, hoping to get your secret military sites, you do